Hi, it's Mark Bernard here, and I'm here to talk about how to become a virtual Chief Information Security Officer. Now, I get lots of questions about what it takes to become a Chief uh, Information Security Officer, and a lot of people say, I love your career. They check out my profile on LinkedIn and they say, wow, I want to be like you when I get to that point in my career. How do I get there? So I created the following slides just to kind of go over a number of different scenarios in how I would be engaged as a virtual Chief Information Security Officer to give you some idea about the types of skills and stuff that you might need. I'm also developing a course. I have a syllabus and curriculum that I'm putting into Lightboard Studio that I will be sharing with you soon from my website. So you might want to keep an eye open for that. Now, there are lots of people out there who will claim that they have the experience and the knowledge to be a Chief Information Security Officer. But I think once you review these slides that I'm about to share with you, you'll soon discover that there's probably a lot of programs out there that are lacking in the depth and level of expertise and professionalism that you need in order to collaborate with the executive management team and the board of directors and still be effective with the operational team in your role. So let's, without further ado, let's go through three different scenarios. Okay, so in some cases, I'll get engaged as an independent consultant, and I'll explain to you what that includes. Another option is that I might get someone might have a startup and they don't have the skills in house, so they might want to outsource the program management part of it. Now, the program manager in a cybersecurity program is actually the Chief Information Security Officer. This is the role that you would play in a full-time gig if you were being hired as a Chief Information Security Officer. So a lot of the skills here you'll recognize. And then finally, there's operations. So there's really kind of two kinds of cybersecurity programs. There's one that's sort of oversight, arm's length reach from the actual day-to-day activities. And then there's another kind where you're fully engaged with the day-to-day activities as part of operations. So when you combine two and one, you have like a full-blown program. And so without further ado, let's continue. And feel free to send me any questions that you might have. Okay. Roles and responsibilities as a consultant. First of all, a big activity that I usually get involved in is I get pulled into a compliance program. So if someone doesn't have a GRC program or an RCM, governance, risk, or compliance, or RCM is risk compliance and management program, then they might hire a consultant, a virtual chief information security officer, to come in and review contracts and statutes and begin to create policies, procedures, and standards, provide some training and awareness, monitoring the program, providing tactical communications, also security testing, internal audit maybe, privacy impact assessments, risk management or risk assessments, and then of course providing compliance with some of the more popular standards. So on a global basis, ISO 27001, and on a US basis, SOC 2, NIST, PCI is more of a global standard, and of course GDPR is for privacy, and it's starting in Europe and it's global footprint. So compliance manager is one role. Crisis management is another role that I might get called into. So there may be an opportunity where an executive team doesn't want to hire a virtual CISO to run their program, but they do have a need where it comes to crisis management. So for instance, if you're planning on how your company is going to deal with ransomware attack or denial of service attack, or maybe it's business continuity or disaster recovery. Okay, so these are the types of crises that can affect not just one location, but many locations around the globe. This is crisis management, and it might be getting called into just doing that role, just working with the team, developing a crisis management playbook, looking at the continuity processes and disaster processes, and also succession planning, and then doing the documentation around that, of course, because documentation is king, right? So that's how we transfer knowledge in a lot of cases, is we record it in documentation and transfer it. Crisis management. Okay. Another role is sales pursuits. Now, I don't know if this ever dawned on you, but especially with startups, really, really important because as they grow their company and their footprint, they need an expert like a vCISO on their team in order to help filter through the requests of customers who they're trying to onboard and sign up as part of their customer list and provide services to them. So the only way to do that is to have somebody who understands cybersecurity from a business perspective. So sales pursuits, also procurement. So perhaps an organization needs to replace, maybe they want to migrate to the cloud. Maybe they need to replace some infrastructure, intrusion prevention systems, firewalls, what have you. Lots of different types of, I guess, infrastructure. Um, they want to go through an RFP process. So they need an expert to come in, gather their requirements, build the RFIP, help the team evaluate the bids, negotiate the contracts, onboard, and exit. Uh, Basically providing project management over a procurement process. Somebody independent who knows what they're doing, who can come in and supplement the team that they already have and help them achieve whatever procurement goal it is that they need. And sometimes that can also play into onboarding. Sometimes you can just get hired to bring in, maybe the RFP process is already completed, and now they need an expert to come in and provide some guidance on how to onboard this technology, or maybe it's an outsourced team, maybe it's a managed monitoring and detection and response team, or maybe it's some new technology, maybe it's artificial intelligence being provided, or some type of intelligence integration. So they need someone to come in who has that senior level management experience, who's been there, done that, has a t-shirt, and can help them get the team on board. And that also means to exit whatever, if there's an incumbent or some service provider in place, you might have to work on the exiting of those, and that's a big deal because there's a lot of knowledge transfer that has to happen if you've had somebody providing services for 5 years or 10 years. There's a lot of intelligence that's been gathered about your organization, and you don't want that to lose that. Because that's what happens sometimes when a service provider is exited, is they take the knowledge with them and they don't give it back to you. So somehow you need to have that brought back in. So I've been in those roles before, uh, providing that sort of expertise. And then there's breach management. Now, breach management, I've also been pulled into organizations where they have a chief information security officer and they've just been terminated, unfortunately, because there's been a breach. So they've been sent home, and now they need someone to come in and mop up and quiet the breach down, get it under control, and manage the investigation, the evidence gathering. Also, prepare the executive team for any types of discussions that they might have with the media or with the board of directors. So these are all very sensitive, high profile pieces of work that a vCISO would get involved in. Another one might be incident management. And this is kind of before the breach happens. There may be some incidents that need to be investigated. Maybe they need some help with the detection and responding, preparing the response, and then help with the recovery from those. So basically, this is sort of the low end part of the crisis management process that we talked about. So crisis management is mostly with the executive team, preparing them on how to deal with these types of crises. Incident management is working with the operational team, making sure that they have an incident handling practice in place that is being tested and reviewed and improved, and making sure that we have the right monitoring systems in place so that we can detect things early. Incident management, and then there's of course project management. It's pretty obvious. All of these things require some kind of a project manager. It could be that the vCISO is being hired to come into the organization as a project manager with deep cybersecurity skills, who will be able to help the organization take care of any of these challenges that they have or opportunities to improve their business. And then there's finally a cybersecurity architect. So I've also been called into an organization to help them plan. So maybe they're a brand new startup. Startups don't usually have enough resources in terms of people to be able to have a dedicated person to provide the security architecture, to take a look at the business that they're doing and help them plan out what security is going to look like in their organization. And so this might be done prematurely. It might be done before maybe any of the sales pursuits happen, or maybe it's being driven because of the opportunities from the sales pursuits. So there's a lot of connected dots here that obviously provide you with a little bit of an overview on the different types of roles that a virtual chief information security officer who's being brought in as a consultant may get involved in within the organization. So let's move on to the second type of opportunity that you might be brought into as a vCISO. And that's program management. Now, program management is a big thing. Again, not all training programs provide the type of skills that I'm talking about here. A lot of them don't, to be honest with you, because this is from years and years of experience. You know, I have 3 decades of experience in working with huge companies like IBM on these types of things. So program management, you know, a big part of program management is setting up all the different procedures and practices that go along with managing a full-blown program. So very important, strategic and tactical planning. I can't emphasize this enough. It's not done nearly as effectively as I've seen that could be done. In the programs that I implement, I build a business plan. It maps to the organization, the enterprise's strategic goals and objectives. So we do the planning 3 to 5 years out. That's strategic. And then the tactical, we break it down into tactical modules. So what is our roadmap for 2023, for example? What do we need to do this year? So provide that strategic and tactical planning and experience. The budget that goes with that, because there's going to be, you know, requirements for resources and for materials and for, you know, software and hardware. So what does that look like? The executive team doesn't want to hire somebody who doesn't know what they're doing in these cases. So it's better to learn about these and come in educated, because they really don't want to write a blank check. That's not cool. And but if you can demonstrate that you have these skills when you come into an organization as a vCISO, then they're more confident in you, and they'll give you more room to maneuver to do what you need to do. So there's strategic and tactical planning, budget management, resource planning. That's when we, you know, determine what skill sets we need. We find the skills gaps, and then we go either internally to try and promote people, or we try to hire from outside if necessary. Performance monitoring. So we set some criteria in place as part of the strategic and tactical plan. We want to make sure that our program is running efficiently. It's running as we promised the executive team and the board of directors. So we have to do the performance monitoring, set up those key performance indicators and track them on a monthly basis. People management. This is, you know, you have a staff sometimes you don't. I've had as many as 160 people reporting to me, and I've had as few as 1 or 2. So no matter how many people there is that's on your team, there's going to be a need for people management. And this is making sure that people get their benefits, people get their salaries. So you kind of have to take off your cybersecurity hat and you have to put on your human resource hat, and you have to work with the people because that's what good leaders do, right? We take care of our team. So people management is really important. The recruitment part is also takes up a lot of cycles. When you need to build a team or add people or replace people, it's going to take up a considerable amount of effort. And unfortunately, there are terminations. Sometimes things just don't work out, and that's kind of the negative side of the role. But it's one that's important. You don't expect anybody else to take care of this by yourself, and there's a very humane way to let someone go, and you don't want to do anything but treat them with respect and total professionalism, right? So there's that part of it. Employee engagement, making sure that the employees are part of your program. Dealing with the vendors and suppliers, that's another skill set. Vulnerability management, of course, you're probably more familiar with this because this is really kind of technology driven. Intelligence management, this is something that we're trying to do more and more of, is sharing intelligence with people in our industry, within our business. Compliance management, I spoke about that on the previous slide. It's also part of the program, as you can imagine. Compliance is a big part. It's one of the 5 enterprise risk management risks So when you're mapping your strategic plan to the enterprise plan, you'll talk about enterprise risk management. That will be part of that discussion, and certainly compliance will be front and center. There's document and record administration. So yeah, we do need to document things. And if you don't deal with that one up front, I can tell you right now, if you let it slide to the back of the list of priorities, it may never get done, and there may be a lot of resentment and pushback on getting it done on time. So it's better to do the documentation, policies, procedures, and standards as part of the program moving forward. And of course, record administration. This is where we keep records to prove things like performance management. So we'll identify what records we keep. When there's changes, we have change requests, for instance. When there's vulnerability management and we identify risks or vulnerabilities that need to be treated, we document those types of records. So there's a long list of records. You can learn a lot about, well, you can learn about all of this stuff in the new program that I'm building, just saying. Okay, and then there's continual improvement roadmap. So we want to have quality management as part of the process. It's very important. It's well accepted across the globe and many, well, millions, literally, of businesses. Quality management rocks, and you make it part of your program, and you'll get a lot of support for that program. And then there's incident management, which I mentioned before, which could be part of your program management responsibilities. Now, there's some other very specific slices here. Governance, handling, the stakeholder engagement, dealing with the legal obligations, the customer, regulatory, and auditor engagements and relationships, and then the roles and responsibilities of your program. There's also risk management. Risk management is how we make decisions around the governance. Governance are the people who actually own the company usually, or they're senior members of the executive team who play a role on the governance committee and help make those decisions. And how they make those decisions is by using risk management. So we identify the risk owners, what the organization's risk appetite is. We identify what the risks are, and we talk about how we're going to treat them on a tactical or strategic basis, depending on what the type of risk is. And then, of course, the treatment plan. Then there's monitoring. Now, we have to monitor the program to make sure that it's working okay. We want to make sure that the investment, remember we were talking about the budget over here under program management? Okay, so we set out a business plan with strategic and tactical goals. We identify a number of projects that need to be implemented this year, maybe next year, and the year after. Okay, we create a budget around that. We do the people management and the resource management to determine how much we need to do that. Now we need to track that on a regular basis, probably a monthly basis, probably talk to the governance committee about how the spend is going on your budget. And then there's compliance, of course, monitoring compliance, making sure that people are staying compliant. And when there's issues that involve non-compliance, then dealing with those. Threat intelligence, monitoring threat intelligence, new developments, sharing that with the appropriate people on the team. Monitoring for events and incidents. So this may be done internally. It could be done through a security operations center. That could be internal or it could be external. Or you could have one of those, manage, detect, respond, MDR, third parties involved, which gets back to managing the supply chain and vendors and suppliers over here. And then there's internal and external audit. They provide the monitoring for the executive team, so we want to make sure we have a good relationship with internal and external audit, and we want to make sure that our program is nice and tight so that we produce good results for the executive team. All right, next. Communications. Communications is an important part of our business. And why is that? It's because how you communicate to people will determine if you reach them and they're engaged or not. So you have to be very careful about the messaging. You have to take off your cybersecurity hat and put on your communications hat. And that communications hat says, okay, so if we have some tactical objectives that we need to achieve within the organization, maybe this is part of a digital transformation exercise, because cybersecurity often is, then we need to craft the messages, and we need to work with the appropriate people who are going to deliver those messages too. So it could be senior management, there could be a communications officer if you're a really mature organization, or it might be you. So, but if you're a virtual Chief Information Security Officer, you need to know about these things. Okay, these are part of your program elements. These are some very specializations within your program that you need to know about and be very good at. The better the communicator you are, the more likely your message is going to get heard and accepted and followed. All right. And next, knowledge management. Now, this one, a lot of, I would dare to guess, probably 99.9% of cybersecurity programs do not have knowledge management in their curriculum. And probably a lot of the other things that I mentioned here, they don't have either. But knowledge management specifically is about information, and it's about the value of information. Now, information, when it becomes knowledge, it becomes valuable, but there's higher levels of knowledge too that's important that we need to protect. So understanding what knowledge needs to be documented, how it needs to be treated, if it needs to be kept updated, so forth. And also putting a value on that in order to make sure it gets the right level of protection. Very important. And oftentimes we create a classification schema and we classify documents. But to be honest with you, a lot of startups don't want a classification schema, and it's very complicated. So if you have a very sophisticated, a very mature company, maybe it's 1,000 employees or more, then it's possible that classification schema might be possible. But if you have like 500 or less, there's a good possibility it's not going to be feasible. So you have to be creative with how you come up with these techniques, how you apply these tools and techniques in order to protect information. And one of them is to identify where's the knowledge? What's the knowledge about? Who's recording the knowledge? Is anybody? And how do we convert implicit knowledge to explicit knowledge? So we have a lot of people who come in who are highly skilled professionals. They're working, they're doing their job. They may not be writing down what they're doing. They may not be creating records. They may not be writing down the procedures, because usually people who know what they're doing don't need procedures, right? So it's a bit of an argument there. You can have that discussion, right? But from the company's perspective, anything that has to do with the organization is of value to them. And certainly whenever there's some kind of continuity planning, or maybe there's some succession planning, or maybe it's a straight up, termination and rehire, that knowledge has to be transferred from one person to another. And it's difficult to do it orally. It's not really 100%, but orally might be part of the process of transferring knowledge. Certainly transferring what a person knows from the implicit direction, maybe by shadowing them and writing it down, and then putting it into an explicit format like a procedure or standard or something, might be the way to go. But there's knowledge there, needs to be protected, and I, for one, identify that as soon as possible, because it's very important to the organization. Oops, sorry, back up. And the next one is architecture. So providing, I mentioned it before, like sometimes as a independent consultant, I might get called in to help design a program and implement a program and then hand the program off to a full-time employee who takes over, right? But if you get hired to come in and actually act in the role of a program manager for cybersecurity, like a chief executive officer, you're a chief information security officer, you're coming in, you need to know how your program is designed. You need to understand how it integrates with the other parts of the organization. So when it comes to creating information standards or logical standards or physical standards for security, those need to be established and need to be implemented within the organization. So that's part of the architecture work that you will do. Okay, so we covered two. We covered what if you're a vCISO and you're coming in as a consultant, and then the second one is what if you're a virtual chief information security officer and you're coming in to do program management. Okay, so now we're going to jump into operations. Now, operations, as you can probably imagine, in any organization is huge, right? There's just so much that has to be done when it comes to cybersecurity. And as I said before, sometimes you can be at the program management level, but be an arm's length reach from the operations team so that you can provide more objective opinions and jump in when there's a problem and provide some kind of assurance to the senior executive team. But there's also scenarios where you're going to come in and you're going to be the operations manager, right? You're going to be asked to integrate. So what are some things that are involved in cybersecurity that touch on operations? Well, you're going to have to know about identity and access management. This is probably the number one thing right here. So privilege management access, along with any kind of human or non-human access, all of this needs to be structured into an identity and access management process, an architecture, if you like, and then with some technology behind it to support it. You're going to have to know about incident management and crisis management. That's part of operations, unfortunately. Although the executive team might handle the crisis management part of it, they're going to be so closely integrated with the operations team whenever there's, some kind of a ransomware attack or somebody has breached some security. It's going to be a very close relationship, okay, between the two. So you need to know how to handle that. There's vulnerability management. I think this one is probably the best known one. Everybody knows that systems need to be patched, software needs to be patched. Compliance management, I've mentioned this a few times. This is not just a consulting opportunity as an independent consultant or a program manager. Of course, program management manager is interested in this because he's going to get asked or she's going to get asked about, hey, how's the compliance working with the GDPR or the privacy regulations? Or how about, SOC 2? Do you have that finished yet? Or ISO 27001. There's lots of different compliance things that we need to do. And of course, NIST, cybersecurity framework, which is getting revised. So there's lots of different compliance things. Compliance is usually comes in 4 different buckets. So there's lawful compliance. So federal statutes, and then there's regulations or the second bucket. And then there's internal facing contracts that we have legal obligations with. And those have to do with, when we license software, in that licensing agreement, we also say we're going to protect the intellectual property of the people we're licensing that software from. So there's an obligation there. And then there's the external facing, which are the customers. And they're probably the most important because they help generate the revenue for the organization. So without a doubt, compliance management is part of a lot of different managers' roles within the organization. And as a virtual CISO, you better know something about compliance management and not just know what it is, but know how to manage it efficiently and effectively with multiple teams engaged in the process. Okay, after compliance management, we have security operations. Now, to be honest with you, security operations in some organizations will take on a number of these different areas. So I'll come back to this one at the end and explain. So for instance, change management, identity and access management, vulnerability management, those could all be pulled under security operations. Asset management could be in security operations, but from a operational perspective, you need to have a good handle on your assets, because if you have assets that are connecting to your network and they're not being managed, the vulnerabilities are not being patched, they're basically exposed to the world, you have a big problem. So asset management is important. So, having an asset taxonomy, understanding what the assets are, getting everybody's agreement on what those assets are, assigning a value to it so you can then begin to evaluate the security architecture around and what level of protection that asset needs, if it's knowledge or if it's a physical asset. So you need to know what the assets are. You need to have a good understanding of asset management. You also need to understand cybersecurity architecture. So we talked about this a few times. So, defense in depth from the cybersecurity. If you have to exchange information across the cyber verse, you want to make sure that it's protected, can't be intercepted, and can't be tampered with, right? So there's a lot of thought that has to go into that. And certainly as our physical parameter kind of decays, if you like, because more and more people are going to the cloud and more people are spread out around the globe working for companies, cybersecurity architecture becomes more and more and more important, because you have to get it in up front. Bringing it in after the fact can be painful. It can be challenging. So very important to have architecture, cybersecurity architecture. So you need to know about that. You need, again, to talk about knowledge management. I mentioned that before. You need to, DevSecO, You need to be on top of any sort of development stuff that's going on. It's sort of a branch within the operations sector that might need some careful handling depending on where the development's being done and who's doing it. So this is a very sensitive area, and you need to have a lot of seniority and experience with dealing with the dev SecOps people if you're going to be successful. So again, if you're just new, you're a new graduate, or you're just somebody who's thinking about coming into the cybersecurity world, and you've got your eyesight set on becoming a chief information security officer, that's your goal, then these slides will help you understand what it is where you need to expand on, and hopefully you'll come to my Lightboard School for Cybersecurity on the Bernard Institute, and we'll be able to help guide you and develop these skills. Okay, so there's DevSecOps. You need to know about that. You need to know about physical security. Again, physical security is huge. So in some companies, you actually have your own private police force. You may have security guards. You know, if you're in the health business or maybe in some other high security business, they may not be part of your cybersecurity program, but there may be a strong connection between the two because a lot of times in cybersecurity, especially if you have a SOC, you're going to see things happening and you're going to ask about the location of people and location of things that are happening. And you may have to liaise with the physical security people in order to go and take a look at that. Then there's also the architecture and the protection. So if you're not in the virtual environment working and you have physical locations, then you definitely need to, do a walk around, make sure that you audit or review locations on a regular basis to make sure the security is in place. I've heard some alarming stories from some third world countries where business has been outsourced to these locations and they've been told that they're secure, but when somebody shows up, they find the fire door pried open so the smokers can go outside and have a cigarette. So there's lots of different stuff, things going on, and there's nothing wrong with smoking or anything as long as you lock the door when you go out and use your pass key to get back in. It's all good, but blocking the door open is a problem. Okay, so physical security, and physical security is huge. I can think of one control framework for physical security that involves 1,200 control points. And that involves officers, but a whole bunch of other things because, you got CCTV involved, you've got proxy cards or access control involved. You might have man traps. Again, you might have local security doing walkarounds and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different elements that you have to think about. Environmental security is more important, I find, mostly if you're in an arid location, because obviously when computers get hot, they don't function too well and sometimes they break. So you need to keep everything cool. Also, there's the employees that you need to be concerned about because they're doing the work in those locations and they need to be, they need to have water and food. And then, of course, environmental security may also touch on, as well as physical security, are disasters, right? So if you're in a floodplain or an area that's prone to having earthquakes, or maybe there's a volcano next door, there's some extra precautions that you might take in order to protect that business. Now, as a vCISO, I say it again, you need to have experience in these areas, right? Or you need to know how to manage the risk around these areas in order to make it acceptable. But experience, trumps a lot of book knowledge. So and you'll get that as you get opportunities. Just make sure that you do a good job on your opportunities so that you can get more experience. Okay, cryptographic key management goes without saying. Cryptographic key management is growing and growing and growing and growing, and we have encryption keys everywhere these days. And the more that encryption grows, the more likely is that data will get lost and it will get lost in a bad way because people will lose the keys and the data will be locked forever. And that happens. And also, if you have employees who implement and use their own encryption and don't share those keys with the organization, then you have the potential of ending up with what we call a brick that's been locked, a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone, and you can't get into it. So cryptographic key management is getting more and more important. You need to know about this. You need to know about hardware security modules, high-tech types of ways of handling encryption keys. Service management, probably another area that gets neglected a lot, is when you have all these important things to do, sometimes you forget that you have to have relationships with people. And, that comes hand in hand with employees and employee engagement and your own staff, but also with the people who are integrated into your organization and providing some kind of input or output to your cybersecurity program and operations. You need to have some service level agreements. You need to know about service management. You need to know about how to make changes to service levels that everyone can agree to, and if they don't, then you need to know how to negotiate. And that goes back to some of the skills that we talked about when it comes to doing RFPs and procurement. Is you need to be able to negotiate, and everybody knows that you can't negotiate unless you bring something on the table. And then before you can put something on the table to negotiate, you need to know what the requirements are. So there's a lot of steps that you need to know in order to be successful at not just procurement, but service management as well going forward. Again, most technology changes every 5 years, maybe sooner. That means that vendors will come and they will go. So onboarding, exiting, doing the service management in between for the security tools and practices that we have is very fundamental. Needs to be learned about. If you don't have it in the program that you're taking today, that's something that we will teach for sure. And I won't underscore the importance of service management. It's so important. Capacity management, equally important, often neglected, unfortunately. I think we do a better job in the cloud where we have elasticity, and we can adjust the AWS or the Azure clouds. We have somebody who's dedicated to that. But capacity management goes way beyond just adjusting the cloud. So there's other skills that you need to learn about when it comes to capacity management. Disaster recovery as well, very important, and often not done that well, because it's kind of seen as being, okay, let's create a plan, and once the plan is done, we'll review it and agree to it, and that will be it. But a disaster recovery plan, in order to be effective, it has to be practiced. Now, this closely integrates, could be the far extreme end of an incident happening. So a cybersecurity incident could be the beginning of a problem. Like, for instance, if you look at Stuxnet virus, right? Knocking off the command and the control around the cooling systems, right? Forcing those plutonium rods to heat up and not get cooled off, right? Could have created a nuclear disaster, right? And that would have been a reason. So this is an example of where information security or cybersecurity plays a role in identifying the disaster, the signs of a disaster coming, and maybe stops it before it actually happens. So very important. Those are integrated. You got to understand how they fit together and how you're going to monitor for those things and what your planning is and testing around that. Same with business continuity. So these two kind of go hand in hand. Business continuity is making sure that the business keeps rolling, and disaster recovery is making sure that we can recover from an extremely bad situation. Business continuity gets easier in the cloud because we have things like service continuity, which I think we're going to talk about in a minute. And service continuity is where we can provide service in the cloud. So if we have one business unit, maybe they're going home for the day and they're in Spain, and we have another business unit picking up that work in North America. And then maybe when North America is going home for the day, maybe they hand it off to an Asian group, right? So we could have sort of a follow the sun kind of business operation if we're a global operation, providing the business continuity around that and testing that along with the disaster recovery is really fundamental in order to make sure that we provide service. Because sometimes when we have agreements with customers, those agreements include financial penalties. And sometimes those financial penalties say that, you know what, if your service goes down, we're going to fine you, or we're not going to pay this month's contract invoice. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's important for the vCISO to have this experience and be able to help out in these areas. As I mentioned, information security continuity. So these, again, these three kind of go hand in hand. So disaster is the worst case scenario. Business continuity is a little blip, or maybe it's a planned blip, but we're continuing to provide service. Information security is saying that, okay, no matter where your locations are, you have the same amount of security applied to the information that you're protecting in those locations. So that's very important. And then we have service continuity. So we have information security continuity, making sure that the security is in place in all those different locations. And then we have service continuity, making sure that is very similar to business continuity, is making sure that the services that we provide. So not only is the business function up and running on a continuous basis, but so is the service. It's always there, it's always available, and that could be online. Whereas a business continuity, we may have storefronts or we may have salespeople that are involved in that process. But service continuity is more or less, are we building the products, licensing them, shipping them out on a regular basis without any interruptions? And then we have supply chain management. And all of these things in the latter part of this quadrant are closely related, but each of them have a very specific purpose. So you can imagine supply chain management is huge. And with one customer that I work with, they had over 4,000 vendors and suppliers, and they had to make sure that they were all compliant with their standards to make sure that they could provide all of these services that we're talking about and in the operations area, or the ones that they had been allocated that they're providing input or output on. And then finally, change management. And we probably could have started with change management, but everything involves change, needs to be recorded and approved before it's deployed. So you need to understand how change management works. So these are all the various types of skills that you need to have if you want to be in operations. So we did a quick review of what I would typically get involved in each of these scenarios. So we talked about what I would do if I was called in as an independent contractor. I may get called in to provide one specific slice of that pie that I showed you. And in operations or in program management, it's a higher level. So you're going to have to come in with a lot of experience and work with senior managers and top managers in order to build their program and help them deploy it. And that means working with the team and getting everybody up to speed, making sure that you have the right competence within your team and that you have the right relationships that you're developing. And if there's challenges, then you work on those challenges and you resolve them. And then finally, then there's operations, which is where the boots really hit the ground, and you have to hit it running. And these are different areas that a virtual chief information security officer could get pulled into. There's many, many different areas. It does require training and experience. You could attempt it fresh out of grad school, but it's going to be challenging, and there's a good chance you might not make it. But if you have someone who's experienced, like myself, I can help you. Certainly, if you take the training that I'm going to provide on my website, on the Bernard Institute for Cybersecurity website, you'll have that knowledge that I have. And over the time that we're together during that training session, you'll be able to grow and ask questions. You can see my credentials here. I have 30 certificates in systems engineering, software engineering, and network engineering. I've been in CISSP for almost 20 years, CSM for 20 years. I've been an auditor, a governance expert, and a risk manager as well. And I've worked in many different technologies and industries. Banking, nanotech was probably the coolest. Banking's very formal, so it's cool too. Pharmaceuticals is very challenging because sometimes I was working with human consumable products. There's a lot of pressure and challenges, and definitely a lot of regulations and compliance that you have to know about. Healthcare, technology services, legal services, academia, government, federal, provincial, regional, cloud computing, telecommunications, logistics, executive relocation, intelligence, SAP data migration services, and manufacturing of technology, food, and clothing. So many different industries I've worked in. And I'll be happy to help you on your career if you so choose to become a virtual Chief Information Security Officer. Drop me a line. You see the subscribe, you can subscribe to my channel, and you can certainly sign up on the website for the more formal training. And I want to thank you for your time and hope you have a great career and a great day. Thank you so much.